Show viewers. This is where we talk about everything current to do with personal injury world and how it affects you. My name is Nunzio Tartaglia, partner of a Melbourne law firm, and tonight I'm filling in for Tony Carbones on a well-earned mid-year break. With me I have two other respected lawyers, John Carancis, a partner of a Melbourne law firm. How are you?
Hi Nunzio, hi viewers.
And Don Maffia, another partner of a law firm.
Hi Nunzio, g'day viewers.
Look, tonight we're talking about nervous shock, and we have a respected guest in Dr Nathan Serry, a consultant psychiatrist, which we'll talk about after the next segment anyway.
However, before that, Nunzio, what's in the news?
Don, this is very close to you, being a TAC litigator,
yes.
that of texting and TAC accidents.
That's right. I think one of our last shows, John, you were on it, we're doing drive distraction and how taking eyes off the road could equal 2 or 3 seconds off equals 40, 60, 80 metres, depending on how fast you're going, that you're distracted and results in unfortunate situations such as accidents, deaths and all those. Having said that, there was recently in a Melbourne newspaper, there was a special investigation as to texting and how it's affected people's lives. It's got stories. It had a 4 or 5 page spread. It had stories about people who unfortunately perished in these accidents or caused other accidents, killing other people, and even people who've done jail time because of this. So like what I said last time, John, it's all about driver education. We have to educate these people to just put away your phones.
Don, one of the stories which just really affected me was the lady's driving along, she sends a text to a friend of hers, hello, how are you? And that's it. She's killed in a car accident. Now, it's these really innocuous texts that literally are killing people. Yeah. It's a shocking situation, isn't it?
It was a confronting article, so just reading some of these stories and people's experiences, both from a victim and I suppose the driver perspective, it was really compelling reading, to be honest. And some of these kids were going to jail for 3 years, and look, they deserved so, but it's hard to read.
And that's what people don't realise. When you kill someone on the road, that's a criminal offence. You will go to jail. Now, even if it's just a little, a texting moment when you're sending a smiley face, you can kill someone. Please don't do it.
And one thing, there's one article where a young girl who perished in the accident was texting straight before. The whole car was mangled, and the only thing they found, right, that wasn't damaged at all, was the phone with her last message on it. So it just goes to show, just got to put it away. Yeah. All right, you'll get there. People can wait. I mean, there's no hurry. They'll get there soon.
Well, I think there's been over 20 deaths in the last, maybe 12 months, but it just shows that, the message maybe is not getting through, and I don't know what else we need to do.
Well, the message isn't getting through because the first of this type of case was 10 years ago, and that person went to jail. That was over 10 years ago. Now, there was another case where the parent sent a text to her daughter while she was driving. Again, her daughter has literally read the text and straight away she's been killed in a car accident. Now, it's not only the person that's driving, but also people that are sending texts knowing that the receiver is actually driving.
Yeah, and they're
don't do it.
Yeah, so.
Now we're talking about texting, but there's other distractions in the car, like radio, GPS systems as well. I just want to mention one of our Facebook viewers, Bruce, who said also, which we didn't mention, John, smoking. That's another distraction as well. Lighting the cigarette.
It can be smoking. You're lighting the cigarette. You're looking for your packet of cigarettes, but at the same time, and this is what I said earlier, I think the last episode. Look, we don't want to get to a nanny state whereby you can't do anything in your car. You got to be reasonable. Otherwise, you won't be able to even listen to the radio because arguably that's a distraction. It has to be a reasonable situation.
Look, I think viewers, you've got to be careful. It's going to be an ongoing issue, and I'm sure it'll be in the media again. But look, we'll press on. We said next one is that of asbestos, John, and that in schools, which is scary.
It's again in the news, Nunzio. We've got asbestos in any school, in any public Commonwealth and state facility that was built before 1980. You bet it's got asbestos. Now, what that means, Nunzio, is you can't disturb. Works at schools, at any public facility cannot be disturbed unless there's licensed tradesmen and builders that are aware of the asbestos.
Qualified to extract it and the
Exactly. They were tearing out the Telstra pits in Queensland, in Victoria, and asbestos fibres were left all over the road for children to walk past and inhale the fibres.
Yeah, as we know, John, the problem's not now, is it? You'll be exposed to asbestos.
Anyone...
But 20, 30 years it might take for that whole asbestosis or mesothelioma to develop.
Exactly. It'll take 20 years for the disease to develop. The estimates are that in 20 odd years' time, more than 40,000 Australians will be suffering from that disease, and I think actually even more.
Look, it's scary figures, and I think we all thought that it was maybe a thing of the past, that it's going to sort of slowly decline, but it could be the other way. So, look, it's going to be one of those things that we hope that...
This is the third wave of the asbestos tragedy. Basically, people that have been exposed from, for example, their father's trousers when they're working in overalls, working in the mines.
Look, and we've got two more articles before we wrap up this segment, but quickly, John, I know Joe Watson, you want to quickly put on the agenda.
Nunzio, Joe Watson and the Essendon Football Club, they're back in the news. They're in big trouble. Next week, we'll look into the legal ramifications as to what will happen to the Essendon Football Club and Joe Watson and any footballer that has taken a banned substance.
It's my team, so I really don't want to talk about it. But anyway, look, just quickly, Don, just leading on to our nervous shock episode, the bully's lawsuit, dead boy's brother's claim.
Okay, so we have a brother who is bringing a claim for nervous shock for arising from the death of his brother who was bullied, and it sounds really bullied. I mean, it wasn't just other students, but teachers as well were involved in this bullying. So the claim seems to be around a psychiatric disorder, psychiatric condition that's arising from not being involved in bullying, but having seen the bullying and also being, unfortunately, the victim of a suicide, and that's a surviving parent, surviving siblings as well.
So it's a nervous shock claim arising out of the suicide of the brother?
Yes. Well, or psychiatric, I wouldn't say so much nervous shock, psychiatric condition or mental harm arising from all this bullying.
I think they've claimed post-traumatic stress disorder, so there's a range of psychological issues. But we'll get Dr Serry to maybe help us out.
It's a tough claim, isn't it?
Oh, look, tough claim, but look, under the Wrongs Act in Victoria, you do have rights to pursue those, and look, we'll talk further about that after the break anyway. So viewers, stay tuned, and we'll introduce Dr Serry when we return. Thank you. Welcome back to the show, viewers. Tonight's episode is about nervous shock and its implications under the Wrongs Act and Transport Accident Commission legislation. Tonight we have a special guest by that of Dr Nathan Serry, who's a consultant psychiatrist. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Do you want to tell the viewers a bit about your background and what you're practicing?
Oh, well, look, I've been a psychiatrist in private practice for a number of years, and I do quite a bit of medico-legal work, so assessments of people who have been injured in different circumstances, for example, motor vehicle accidents, workplace. But I've also got my own private practice, and I'm happy to be here tonight. Nice to be with you.
And Doctor, when you say medico-legal, that pretty much means you're engaged by maybe lawyers or insurance companies to independently assess a person, client, a claimant, and then eventually provide your opinion, but maybe even go to court to, give your opinion to the court?
Yes, it's about undertaking an independent assessment of somebody either at the request of their law firm or of the insuring agency, which might be, for example, one of the WorkSafe agencies or the TAC. One does an independent assessment. It doesn't matter who's actually asking you to do the assessment is always independent. Often it's just the only contact that you have with the person is doing that one-off assessment, but sometimes the case will progress and you'll have to actually go to court and give evidence on the basis of your assessment.
Doctor, with regard to these impairments, look, under the Wrongs Act legislation, you need, for a psychiatric impairment, you need over 10%, and TAC obviously does impairments as well. Can you explain to the viewers, how these guides work and, how you assess, clients in that regard?
If you can, Doctor.
Yeah.
Very difficult guidelines to read.
Look, they are complicated, and it's a process that one doesn't actually think about until you start reviewing what you've actually gleaned from the person who you are assessing. Originally, the guides were based on the American Medical Association guides for the assessment of permanent impairment. In Victoria, we have changed to now use what's called the Guides for the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment for Clinicians, and the abbreviation is the GEPIC. So we use the GEPIC, and that actually looks at the clinical presentation of the person who you're seeing. Not just the story that you are obtaining, but your own specialist psychiatric assessment of the individual. So we're looking at different aspects of the person's presentation, and we're coming up with a figure which is based on those particular tables, and that gives the level of impairment.
And these guidelines, we talk about percentages in the personal injuries world. So it really depends on the type of injury and also what the law says about what to attribute, how to attribute. Like, for example, under the Transport Accident Act, you can only take into account primary trauma, not secondary trauma.
Yes.
So there's a bit of that going on too, Doctor. And I guess for you, as being independent medico-legal, so you're pretty much presented with a client, got to make the diagnosis, and then apply all these different tests and rules and all these things that come under the legal realms.
Yes, and I think that you mentioned primary and secondary. What that basically means, the legislation says that we have to discount any psychiatric impairment that arises as a result of any physical injury which is sustained. So we're assessing the overall level of impairment, but then discounting that which comes as a consequence of a physical injury. So we're looking at essentially what is the direct nervous shock, which is what we're talking about today, of a particular incident or injury. So the trauma that the person experiences, the psychological or psychiatric trauma that the person experiences, they're the sorts of things that we're assessing.
Well, look, we might as well lead on to it, Doctor. So from a psychological perspective and a clinical perspective, what is sort of nervous shock and the symptoms surrounding that? How do you explain that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, nervous shock is a term that psychiatrists never use. It's a legal term, and my understanding is it's from English law, and it's about a psychiatric injury which arises from exposure to a traumatic incident. Am I on the right path there?
Well, look, it depends where you look at it. Under the Transport Accident Act, the law says that it's got to be a mental injury, which can include, I'll just read it, nervous shock suffered by a person who was directly involved in a transport accident or witnessed an accident or immediate aftermath. Now, that's under the Transport Accident Act. And that definition has widened a bit, because it can also include not only people who have been witnessed an accident, but who have had some involvement in terms of close ties and affection to the person injured or who's died as a result. Nunzio, in the Wrongs Act, it's a little bit different but similar.
A little bit different. Again, I'll read from it. It said, a person does not owe a duty to another person to take care not to cause the plaintiff pure mental harm unless the defendant foresaw or to have foreseen that a person of normal fortitude might, in the circumstance of the case, suffer a recognised psychiatric illness if reasonable care were not taken. And circumstances that, I suppose, reflect that are things like, said, sudden shock, witnessing someone being killed or injured, being in close proximity in terms of relationship and things to that nature. So, look, we'll touch on, I suppose, cases in this regard a little bit later. But, Doctor, my question to you is, from a physical injury, you go to a physical doctor, you've got radiology. It's fairly easy to, or not easy, but it's more identifiable to see someone's injury and impairment. How do you get that from someone who's suffered some mental harm in this regard? What are the symptoms that you look at, or the signs from a patient point of view?
Well, the key things that one tends to see after someone has been exposed to a major trauma, symptoms of anxiety, and what perhaps one of the more common diagnoses is post-traumatic stress disorder. And people who are traumatised do tend to demonstrate an array of symptoms which are fairly typical. People are going to have difficulty getting the traumatic experience out of their mind. They may well be experiencing flashbacks, nightmares. They don't want to expose themselves to anything which reminds them of that particular event. They often become withdrawn and avoidant, and they very frequently become depressed as well. So we're seeing a range of psychiatric type symptoms which affect the person's day-to-day functioning and cause them subjective distress. So they're the key things that we tend to be looking for: impaired functioning and subjective distress.
Do you find that patients sometimes are unaware of exactly what their diagnosis is because they haven't sought treatment, but they come to you and obviously they're describing their symptoms to you and they have no idea exactly what they're suffering? Is that common?
I think that that's very frequently the case. A lot of people are not overly familiar with the type of distress that occurs as a result of a psychological trauma, and a lot of people don't want to talk about that sort of thing. They're uncomfortable talking about that sort of thing, and there still, sadly, is an element of stigma associated with mental distress and mental illness. People aren't all that forthcoming at times.
So, Doctor, with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, so that usually involves perceiving or seeing some shock, sudden shock, like an accident, person dying, person being injured.
It does, although more recently there has been a change in the diagnostic criteria in relation to these conditions. So it is a bit more general now. So one doesn't actually have to witness one specific trauma for the diagnosis to be made.
Look, Don, we'll talk about some specific cases after the break. As I said, running out a bit of time there, but we'll be back after the break. Stay tuned. Back to the show, viewers, and Don, you had a question for Dr. before we left?
We've been talking about sudden shock. So, Nunzio, there's an example of that case, Wicks and State Rail, where there was police officers called to a scene. It was a train crash. I think there were bodies everywhere, missing parts, the whole lot.
Dismembered bodies.
And they were, I think they were diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder, and I think one of it was a post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's a sudden shock. But how about this now, the law's changed to evolve to include people who've had ties and affection, close ties or a special relationship, who may not have witnessed the accident, who may have heard it on the radio, or who may have just seen it on TV. Can those people who haven't perceived a sudden shock develop a post-traumatic stress disorder or something similar?
They can certainly develop all of the symptoms of that condition, and usually what's required is that their initial reaction is characterised by a sense of horror and intense distress. So there's a threat to their own personal integrity, or they feel an enormous level of initial distress. And then what transpires is that they develop a condition which is not dissimilar symptomatically to what we consider to be a post-traumatic stress disorder.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be sudden, can be protracted?
Well, we often see in people, say for example, first attenders, emergency service workers who are recurrently exposed to various traumas, that they don't develop the symptoms of their condition at any one particular time in response to a particular stress, but at some stage down the track they have been made vulnerable by virtue of their exposure recurrently to traumas, and they develop the condition later on. So these this post-traumatic stress disorder condition is not a one-size-fits-all condition. There are different ways that the condition presents, and it is unique in every individual's case. And so one can't predict how an individual is going to react, nor what their clinical course will be.
Don, look, that's why I think this Wicks decision, which was a High Court authority, was a really good decision, because these police officers, they came to a scene of an accident, didn't witness the accident, but witnessing dismembered bodies, people injured and in horrific accident, and the court said, well, that shock, it's not just for that initial accident, and they extended that. And I think it's a great decision by the High Court.
Look, I think so. I mean, look, there's many scenarios. I mean, we look at the wall collapse in Swanston Street in Victoria. I mean, the parents were in France or thereabouts, and they may have seen it on TV. I mean, that's probably enough, according to law, to be nervous shock.
Well, look, the Annette's case, which is another High Court authority, which is probably the leading authority on sort of nervous shock, is that of Annette, and basically said that if you've got a special relationship with the injured person or the deceased, that you can effectively sue for nervous shock.
But it's got to be more than just grief and sorrow, doesn't it, Doctor?
It has to be more than what one would expect to be the normal grieving reaction when one is exposed to a circumstance where there is loss. So there has to be the development of a clinical syndrome which is characteristic of post-traumatic stress disorder, an anxiety reaction, a depressive reaction.
And is there any timeline? So let's say grieve for 6 weeks. Beyond that, it is a diagnosable psychiatric condition, or it really just depends on the person?
There used to be this sort of sense that a normal grief reaction would take round about 6 months to overcome. I think that we've been shifting away from this prescriptive approach to how long someone should grieve for. Every individual grieves in their own unique way, and I don't think that we any longer say, well, you should be over that loss within a set number of weeks or months. I think that dehumanises the whole spectrum.
I agree with you, because again, it's not like the comparison with the physical injury. It's not something where you get a broken bone, it's identifiable. It's you can't put a set requirements on it. I think everybody differs, and it's very subjective in that way. But Don, do you want to tell the viewers about the facts of Annette, because I think they're really interesting.
In this case, just put it simply, it was where parents sent off their son to a remote cattle station, and they were reassured by the employer of the son that he'll be looked after, and they just sent him off in the middle of nowhere, no help, by himself, and then he disappeared, and they found him dead like 3-4 months later. So it was a whole stretched out sort of distressing situation for the parents. And look, Annette's did win that case, but that was also heard with another case, which was Thames in New South Wales. This is where they brought in the test of, Doctor, normal fortitude. Does such a thing exist?
Well, the use of the term normal, and there's no definition of the term normal, but I think it's almost a removal of what is abnormal. So if you consider normal to be the absence of pathology, the absence of impaired functioning, the absence of extreme and prolonged levels of distress, normal fortitude would probably be what you would expect the ordinary person to be able to cope with in their day-to-day life. So when that is exceeded, when somebody's reaction is outside what you would expect, when someone is overloaded beyond that which you would consider to be reasonable, then I think that you move beyond normal fortitude. We've all got our breaking point. Yes. We all have at the threshold of stress that we're able to cope with. And so when what the reasonable person would think is excessive, that's probably getting beyond normal fortitude.
To give just a bit of context to the normal fortitude, in this case, it was regarded that a person of normal fortitude, or the plaintiff in this case, would not suffer psychiatric injury, because what happened was there was a traffic accident, and the police incorrectly said that she was driving under the influence of alcohol at a reading of 0.14, when that was actually the other driver's record, and she suffered a psychiatric condition and illness as a result of that. She just could not, I suppose, get rid of that allegation in her mind, and she had never drank for 20 years, and the court found that I suppose a person of normal fortune would not suffer that type of illness. And it's a subjective thing, but it's a difficult
Well, then
one.
that brings in another question. Who is a reasonable person? Does such a thing exist? But
We
that's
need-
another discussion.
We need another show for that, Don. I said,
But
I
it
think
does
no one
bring
can
in-
into that.
Yeah, look, and that the court found that was just extreme reaction. It was just what wasn't expected of someone to have such a psychiatric disorder arising from a mistake. So
Look, I must admit, I think those High Court decisions of Annette and Tame, I think are right on point. And I think they were well drafted, but that's
Yeah.
my opinion anyway. That's all we have time for tonight, viewers, but I'd like to thank Dr Serry for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and so we'll try and get you on again soon.
Thank you.
Don, any closing remarks?
thanks, Doctor. Thanks for coming on, and we'll get you back on once I find this reasonable person who must exist somewhere. But thanks, viewers.
Viewers, please follow us on our YouTube for further episodes, and most importantly, please seek the advice of a lawyer. It's a really interesting topic, not only this but all other topics, and please seek the lawyer's advice. But as Tony Cabone would sign off, stay tuned and stay safe.